This is Crawford's latest and greatest air oil separator. This is the V3 AOS system. That's right, this is the new hotness, the Crawford V3 AOS, or air oil separator. Now, I've got the V2 here and I want to compare them, basically what's different between the V3 and the old V2. But before I did that, I want to explain what an air oil separator does. Now, if you already know what it does, you can fast forward through the video. But for those of you who don't know, an air oil separator does just that. It separates air from oil, but that doesn't explain the full, story. What this does is it sits between the engine and the intake. Now, on a normal car, your bone stock, let's say an STI for example, you have hoses that run from the heads and the actual engine block itself up into the intake. As the intake produces vacuum, it's going to suck up air outside or from the inside of that engine, but it's not clean air, no. It's always gonna have some amount of oil in it, and you can prove this by, if you have ever taken off your intercooler or an intake pipe, rub your finger along the inside, you've got a big film of oil in there, right? So that's where this guy comes into play, and he sits between the engine and the intake, and as that dirty oil-filled air passes into here, it creates a I guess patented turbulence. Basically, the way they have this set up internally is it forces the oil to separate from the air, and then nice clean air is sent to the intake, and oil is dropped down and sent back to the engine. And this is incredibly beneficial for many reasons. One, it can improve engine longevity, reduce oil consumption, and even increase horsepower a little bit, but we'll get into that later. So the next question that I usually get is, what's the difference between an AOS and a catch can? Because they kind of do the same thing. Well, there's a big difference. So catch can, if this was a catch can, inside it would be completely hollow, and all it does is it catches the oil particulates, the heavy oil particulates, and tries to send clean air back, and it does an okay job. But an AOS is designed out of the box and internally to forcefully separate the oil from the air, and so you get a much more efficient separation, and you get a lot cleaner air going to the intake to be burned. Now, why is this beneficial, or why does your car need an air oil separator? Now let's talk about Subarus in general, because Crawford makes most of these specific for Subarus. Well, your Subarus in general are notorious for burning oil, or just oil consumption in general. In fact, if you look in the Subaru kind of owner's manual, it's normal to burn about a quart every 1,000 miles, which seems pretty excessive, but it's just the inherent design of a Subaru engine. The flat four, as they call it, or a boxer style engine, what happens is, as you're just driving, normally taking turns, oil gets pushed out to the heads, and then as oil gets pushed to the heads, it naturally wants to get sucked up through that system, to go be burned into the intake. And so you end up burning a lot of oil. And so something like this can greatly reduce your oil consumption. But not only that, when I was talking about increasing power, increasing engine longevity, oil can be burned, but it hasn't been refined to have a high octane rating. Let's say you fill up with 93 octane fuel, lucky you, then you have 93 octane fuel going into the engine. Well, oil has a significantly lower octane, and what can happen, especially if you're wide open throttle, you're cruising up the canyon, or you're just blasting around the track or whatever, if you're burning oil, it effectively lowers the octane rating inside the combustion chamber, and what can happen is you get detonation, where essentially you create a ignition before the spark plug actually sparks, and this can be disastrous to engines, particularly Subaru engines, because of their notoriously weak ringlands. And so you hear a lot about ringland failure. Well, one way to help prevent that is by running a catch can. Now, Subaru has kind of addressed this issue with the new FA20 engine, but the FA20 is a direct injector motor, and you don't get the benefit of the injectors washing over the intake valves and cleaning them off, and so you have a lot of carbon buildup. Well, one of the reasons why you get a lot of carbon buildup is because you have oil being deposited on top of those valves and burning and hardening and creating that crust, right? This can help prevent that as well. So not only can potentially increase horsepower, reduce engine harm, but you can also keep your intake valves clean and reduce, servicing the engine every so often. So what makes the Crawford AOS so good? Well, they were one of the first to produce like a full standalone AOS for the Subaru system, and a proper AOS. I guess I should phrase that. But they have a patented dual baffle design inside here, which really does help remove all the oil, all the particulates, and sending true clean air to the intake to be burned. Installation is always incredibly straightforward on the Crawford systems. Plus, one of the things I really like about Crawford is the fact that they had their V1 and then they found a better way to do it. So they produced the V2. Now they have the V3. They're constantly improving, trying to produce a better air oil system, or air oil separator, and always trying to just improve whatever they can, and also making it much easier to install. They have vehicle-specific brackets, but even if you don't have your vehicle specifically listed, they do offer a universal air oil separator as well, and you just have to kind of, figure out how to install it. But other than that, it always will include everything you're gonna need to install it, and it's probably one of the quickest to install in the industry as well. So let's talk about the cool thing, right? The difference between the new V3 and the V2. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the V2, but they found a better way to basically have air oil separation. So on the V2, you're gonna notice a bunch more lines coming off of this, and the reason for that is because this was a improvement over the V1. They added coolant lines, so you have coolant in, coolant out. Now, it makes it good because on the V1s, people were noticing that there had some condensation buildup inside. Basically, you'd get like oil gunk, right? And so Crawford's like, hey, we can fix this. So we're gonna add, you have to heat. You have to keep this thing nice and toasty. And so by adding coolant lines in and out, they were able to maintain a consistent heat, and it greatly reduced that that oil gunky buildup. Which is fantastic. Now, the only downside to this system is that you do have to hook up coolant lines, which I don't know about you guys, but I've never liked messing with coolant lines if I don't have to. So, welcome to the V3. They have figured out how to heat this basically just by radiant heat within the engine bay to keep that gunk or that buildup from staying in the system without having to run coolant lines, which is a huge benefit. Next, and I would say this is the biggest one, you can keep your PCV valve or the whole system with this particular can. Now, this is great because if you live in California or a state that has very strict emissions regulations, removal of the PCV system is illegal. And so with this system, they've actually used like dual chambers inside here. That actually makes use of that PCV system. And a lot of people think, well, if you're using the PCV system and you're still using a catch can, you're gonna have, it's not gonna be efficient. You can make it efficient on boost or out of boost. But with their dual chamber system in here, they actually achieve efficiency whether you're on boost or out of boost, which is really freaking cool. So they basically use either the vacuum from the intake when it needs it, or the actual oil system pressure as well to keep clean air going into the intake and keep you from burning the oil. And that's why I think this is one of the coolest AOSs on the market. Plus, I'm a big fan of not messing with coolant lines. So this is probably now officially one of the quickest to install that's on the market because you're not having to mess with coolant lines. You're literally tapping into the PCV system, running your lines, running it back to the intake. It's about as simple as it can get. Comes with everything you're gonna need to install it. I think Crawford has absolutely killed it with their V3 system. So if you are looking for an AOS, definitely check out Crawford. And whether you do the V2 or the V3, honestly, you can't go wrong with either one. Just know the difference. This one, you have to hook up coolant lines. You do have to remove your PCV system. This one, no coolant lines. You don't have to remove your PCV system. And it works probably even a little bit more efficiently than this one, but both are gonna be killer. Both can save your engine, and both should have been installed from the factory. Without a doubt, this is one of the best things you can do. If you don't mod your car at all, at least do an AOS. It's one of those no-brainer type things just because it will keep the engine running longer, happier, and producing the power that it wants to produce from the factory. Definitely a cool product. Check it out. It's all the time we've got for you today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.